Hey, all you cool cats and kittens, it's your favorite history teacher back at you again with another historical video. And today we continue our nationalism push, our nationalism unit, and things are starting to get interesting. And we're here to talk about it. We're here to talk about what's the T. So let's get into it. Let me share my screen. All right, so to title note day again. We're in a different chapter. We're in the next chapter. We finally got out of chapter 5, and now we're in chapter 6. So the chapter 6 title is Mass Society and Democracy. Remember, we talked about this with the last unit with the Industrial Revolution. Now we're continuing on with our nationalism push, talking about democracy. So chapter 6, lesson 3, the national state and democracy. There's that word national, okay? Love for your country, pride in your country. America. All right, that was your warm-up. Objectives, we're going to describe the political developments in Western, Central, and Eastern Europe in the late 19th century. And explain how international rivalries pushed Europe towards war. We're on the doorstep of World War I, knocking. Hello. All right, so democracy spreads. By the late 19th century, there were many signs that political democracy was expanding in Western Europe. First, universal male suffrage laws were passed. Second, a prime minister was responsible for the popularly elected legislative body, not a king or a president. This principle is called ministerial responsibility, and it is crucial for democracy. Third, mass political parties formed. So, one such way, Great Britain had long been working with a two-party parliamentary system. In a parliamentary system, the party with the greatest representation in parliament forms the government, the leader of which is the prime minister. The two parties, the liberals and the conservatives, in this aspect, competed to pass laws that expanded the right to vote. Reform Acts in 1867 and 1884 increased the number of adult male voters, and by 1918, males of 21 and women over 30 could vote. At the beginning of the 20th century, now we're talking about the 1900s, political democracy was becoming well established in Britain. Social reforms for the working class soon followed. In 1900, a new Labor Party emerged and dedicated itself to the interests of workers. To retain the workers' support, liberals voted for social reforms like unemployment benefits and old age pensions. Retirement, that's what they mean. And hey, there's Parliament. That's what Parliament looks like. All right, other democratic examples. In France, the collapse of Louis Napoleon's Second Empire, or Napoleon III, left the country in confusion. Finally, in 1875, the Third Republic gained a Republican constitution. This new government had a president and a two-house legislature. The upper house, or the Senate, was elected by high-ranking officials. All adult males voted for members of the lower house, the Chamber of Deputies. A premier or prime minister led the government, was responsible for the Chamber of Deputies. France, however, failed to develop a strong parliamentary system. The existence of a dozen political parties forced the premier to depend on a coalition of parties to stay in power. Nevertheless, by 1914, the Third Republic had the loyalty of most voters. Now we're going to shift over to Italy. Italy had emerged by 1870 as a united state, a united country. However, there was little national unity between the three poverty-stricken South and the industrialized North. Turmoil between labor and industry weakened the social fabric of the nation. Even universal male suffrage, granted in 1912, did little to halt the widespread government corruption and weakness. They just weren't good at running their countries. All right, democracy's slow spread. Unlike these republics and constitutional monarchies of many Western European states, Central and Eastern Europe had more conservative governments. In Germany, Austria-Hungary, the Ottoman Empire, and Russia is where the position of the monarch remained much stronger. Again, they tried to, keep the concert of Europe going. The constitution of the new imperial Germany that Otto von Bismarck began in 1871 set up a two-house legislature. The lower house, called the Reichstag, was elected on the basis of universal male suffrage. The upper house was called the Bundesrat. Ministers of the government were responsible not to the parliament, but to the person of the emperor, who controlled the armed forces, foreign policy, and the bureaucracy. As chancellor, prime minister, aka same thing, Bismarck worked to keep Germany from becoming a democracy. By the reign of William II, the Kaiser, from 1888 to 1918, Germany had become the strongest military and industrial power in Europe. With the expansion of industry in cities came the demands for democracy. Conservative forces, especially nobility and big industrialists, tried to thwart the movement for democracy by supporting a strong foreign policy. They believed that expansion abroad would increase their profits and would also divert people from pursuing democratic reforms. They might have had examples of democracy in these other nations, and they saw how long it took for France to come around, and they look at how corrupt Italy was, and they're like, maybe democracy isn't for us. And, democracy is kind of an extension from the Enlightenment. And look what the Enlightenment caused, all those revolutions. Maybe they're just like, we don't want to do that anymore. Well, we're tired of it. That's the Reichstag, the actual building in Germany. All right, empire's unrest. So after the creation of the dual monarchy in Austria-Hungary in 1867, Austria adopted a constitution that, in theory, set up a parliamentary system with ministerial responsibility. In reality, though, the emperor, Francis Joseph, largely ignored this system. Great guy. He appointed and dismissed his own ministers and issued decrees when parliament was not in session. The empire remained troubled by conflicts among its ethnic groups. A German minority governed Austria, but felt increasingly threatened by Czechs, Poles, Italians, and other Slavic groups within the empire. Representatives of these groups in the new parliament agitated for their freedom, which encouraged the autocratic emperor to ignore the parliament and govern by imperial decrees. Unlike Austria, Hungary had a parliament that worked, and it was controlled by landowners who dominated the peasants and ethnic groups. Nothing really changed, right, in Hungary. In Russia, Nicholas II, the last Romanov, began his rule in 1894, believing the absolute power of the czars should be preserved, but conditions were changing. By 1900, Russia had become the fourth largest producer of steel. With industrialization came factories and industrial working class and pitiful working and living conditions. Socialist parties developed, but government repression forced them underground. The growing discontent and opposition to the czar's regime finally exploded. January 22nd, 1905, a massive procession of workers went to the Winter Palace in St. Petersburg to present a petition of grievances to the czar. Troops will open fire on the peaceful demonstrators, killing hundreds. It's called Bloody Sunday, and it will cause the workers throughout Russia to strike. Nicholas II was eventually forced to grant civil liberties and to create a legislative assembly called the Duma. And by 1907, the Tsar curtailed that power of the Duma again and used the army and bureaucracy to rule Russia. So here are all the different languages within the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Remember, you got Italians in the northern Italy. You got the Serbs, the Croats, the Bulgarians, Romanians, Poles, Czechs, Germans. I mean, it's just a hodgepodge. It is literally a melting pot. That's Tsar Nicholas II. That's Bloody Sunday. All right, empire's problems. So the Ottoman Empire, we talked about the Ottoman Empire in the last unit, and the Ottoman Empire was failing. With its capital in Istanbul, it's Constantinople, in Europe's far southeastern edge, it was beset by problems by the 1800s. Beginning in the 1600s, the empire had lost most of its economic power because the opening of the Americas to trade greatly reduced the trade that passed through the empire's lands. They're not going to, if they can go cheaply over water to America that has new riches, new resources, Why pay the Ottoman Turks the toll to use their Silk Roads? This result was the creation of trade imbalance between the empire and the rest of Europe. Beginning in the 1800s, the Ottoman sultans attempted to industrialize the empire's economy. Their strict price regulations and influence of European empires and corporations meant that their industries could not compete with the much cheaper manufactured goods from elsewhere. And by the middle of the 1800s, the economy of the empire was in decline. The empire's economic peril meant that there was little money in the treasury to modernize its economy, its government, or its military. By the mid-century, some European leaders would take to calling the Ottoman Empire the sick man of Europe. In the late 1800s, it would lose most of its territory in Europe to nationalist revolts and uprisings. So this is territory lost, what it used to be. So from 1800 to 1877, this purple stuff is what they lost. Right? And then from 1878 to 1913, all this orange stuff, they lost. And the Ottoman Empire by the start of World War I was just in green. That's one of the sultans during this time period, Sultan Mehmet. All right, American update. Yeah, we can talk about America briefly again. Following the Civil War, 4 years persevered and preserved the American nation, but the Old South, the economy in the South had been destroyed. In 1865, the 13th Amendment to the Constitution was passed, abolishing slavery. Later, the 14th and 15th Amendments gave citizenship to African Americans and the right to vote for African American males. New state laws in the South, however, soon stripped African Americans of the right to vote, or they put in, these literacy tests, poll taxes, all that kind of stuff to prevent African Americans from voting. By 1880, supporters of white supremacy were back in power everywhere in the South, even though they were told that if you were a member of the Confederacy during the Civil War, you could not run for office. Who's going to stop them from electing them in the South? And they were just put back into power. Between 1860 and 1914, the U.S. shifted from a farm-based economy to industrial economy. American steel and iron production was the best in the world in 1900. Industrialization led to urbanization, and by 1900, the U.S. had 3 cities with populations over 1 million, with New York City up to 4 million people. In 1900, the U.S. was the world's richest nation, but the richest 9% of Americans owned 70% of the wealth. Many workers labored in unsafe factories. Devastating cycles of unemployment made them insecure. Many tried to organize unions, but the American Federation of Labor represented only 8% of the labor force at that time. In the late 1800s, the U.S. began to expand abroad. The Samoan Islands in the Pacific were the first important U.S. colony. By 1887, Americans controlled the sugar industry on the Hawaiian Islands. As more and more Americans settled in Hawaii, they wanted more political power. When the Queen Liliuokalani tried to strengthen the monarchy to keep the islands under her control, the U.S. sent a military force to the islands. The Queen was deposed, and the U.S. annexed the island in 1898. In 1898, the U.S. defeated Spain in the Spanish-American War, and as a result, the U.S. acquired the former Spanish possessions of Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines. But you'll hear more about that later next year in U.S. history. So, these are topics you'll discuss next year, but it's kind of good to know that, America was expanding. And here, 10,000 miles from tip to tip. All right, German changes. So, Otto von Bismarck realized that Germany's emergence in 1871 as the most powerful state in continental Europe had upset the balance of power established at Vienna in 1815, the Congress of Vienna. Remember that? Fearing that France intended to create an anti-German alliance, Bismarck made a defensive alliance with Austria-Hungary in 1879, and 1889 with Italy joined this alliance. This triple alliance united the powers of Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy in a defensive alliance against France. That's a test question. I know that for a fact. At the same time, Bismarck maintained a separate treaty with Russia. Bismarck was aware that Germany's position in the center of Europe made it strategically vulnerable. He greatly feared that Germany would be forced to fight a war on two fronts, to the east and west, so a German alliance with Russia would put these fears to rest. That rhymed. In 1890, however, Kaiser William fired Bismarck and took control of Germany's foreign policy. The Kaiser embarked on an activist policy dedicated to enhancing German power. He craved international prestige and wanted to find Germany's rightful place in the sun. One of these changes William made in foreign policy was to drop the treaty with Russia. Almost immediately in 1894, France formed an alliance with Russia. Germany now lost a hostile power on her western border and her eastern border, what Bismarck exactly feared. Over the next decade, German policies caused the British to draw closer and closer to France. And in 1907, an alliance of Great Britain, France, and Russia, called the Triple Entente, stood to oppose the Triple Alliance. Think of it in basketball terms, the big three. The original big three of like Ray Allen, Kevin Garnett, and Paul Pierce. You got LeBron James, Chris Bosh, and Dwayne Wade, or Klay Thompson, Draymond Green, Stephen Curry. You know what I'm saying? So think of those big three alliances. You're not gonna fight these big three powers. So now Europe was dangerously divided into opposing camps, unwilling to compromise. So here are those three. Francis Joseph, William II, and the Italian guy. I don't know his name, sadly. Here's Bismarck getting fired. And here are the two alliances: Germany, Austria-Hungary, Italy against France, Great Britain, and Russia. And look, Germany has to fight on both sides. And that's going to become an issue when World War I comes up. All right, Balkan drama. A lot of drama in the Balkans. In the 1800s, the Ottoman Empire began to fall apart. Most of its Balkan provinces gained freedom. The two great powers, Austria-Hungary and Russia, saw their chance to gain influence in the Balkans. The rivalry over the Balkans was one of the causes over World War I. 1878, Greece, Serbia, and Romania became independent from Austria-Hungary. From the Ottoman Empire. Bulgaria was not independent, but was allowed to operate autonomously under Russian protection. Balkan territories of Bosnia and Herzegovina were placed under the protection of Austria-Hungary. In 1908, Austria-Hungary took the drastic step of annexing Bosnia and Herzegovina. Serbia was outraged by this annexation of the two Slavic-speaking countries and led to an international controversy and dashed the Serbians' hopes of creating a large Serbian kingdom that would include most southern Slavs. The Russians were the self-appointed protectors of their fellow Slavs because that's the language they speak, culture they have, and they supported the Serbs and opposed this annexation of Bosnia and Herzegovina. Backed by the Russians, the Serbs prepared for war against Austria-Hungary. Emperor William II of Germany demanded that the Russians accept Austria-Hungary's annexation of Bosnia and Herzegovina or faced war. What are you going to do about it? Exactly. That's Francis Joseph. That's, I think that's, what is that? Oh, this is such a pixelated picture. That's the Ottoman Emperor, and I think that's Nicholas II. All right, more drama. Just continue the Balkan drama as your title. Weakened from their defeat in the Russo-Japanese War in 1905, the Russians backed down but vowed revenge. The two wars between the Balkan states in 1912 and 1913 further embittered inhabitants and created more tension among the great powers. Austria-Hungary was convinced that Serbian nationalism was a threat to its empire and Serbia must be crushed. Serbia, too, blamed Austria-Hungary for its failure to create a large Serbian kingdom like they wanted. Serbia's chief supporter, Russia, was determined not to back down again in the event of another confrontation with Austria-Hungary or Germany in the Balkans. Finally, the allies of Austria-Hungary and Russia were determined to support their respective allies more strongly in another crisis. So, by the beginnings of 1914, these countries viewed each other with the suspicion, and Europe was on the verge of war. So this is Austria-Hungary, the top in green, and these are the Ottoman Empire's, all these the yellow, okay, and these are the new colors right here are newly independent, and so Russia wants to defend these areas. And this is what happens. There's 2 Balkan wars. Okay. This is at the start in 1912, and this is by the end of 1913. So 2 wars, and this is what's created. All right. And then we're going to get into World War I, but that's it. All right. That's going to conclude. I know it was a little bit longer, but hey, some of these topics are so important to know as to why World War I began. So hopefully you guys picked up on some of those things. And yeah, your homework, is that a 3? Yeah. Your homework is page 237, 2 through 4. Page 237, 2 through 4. And yeah, hopefully you guys did enjoy that. If you did, make sure you hit that like button, leave a comment, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.